experience under your belt, you've had a career, you've had family, friends, maybe kids, whatever. You've begun to actually live life to the point where you've learned and gleaned something from it. I think that makes it better. And so I think that's why it does get better with age. And there are people who are in their 70s and 80s still having sex. And so obviously there must be something to that. Sex is also equally as important in a relationship as love and intellectual stimulation. I've been in relationships in the past that I had great rapport intellectually with the men, and I loved the men and all that, but the sex was just not there at all. Either it was non-existent or just was bad or not. We weren't compatible for whatever reason sexually. And I think, that's something I learned also, that's equally as important in a relationship. You've got to have all three components: the sex, the sexual stimulation, compatibility, as well as the intellectual and emotional. And so that's something you need to remember as you age, if you're under 40, that, or even if you're over it and haven't recognized this yet, that it is important to have all three, and not to convince yourself or trick yourself into believing that, it's not that important, if we don't have it that often, or it's not that good, because it is important. It is very important. All of these things need to be in place, not just 1, 2, or 3, but all three to have a successful long-term relationship, in my opinion. Speaking of relationships take work. This is something else I wanted to point out. And both people have to be willing to compromise and to work on it. Compromise, this is something you've heard so many times, I'm sure, on so many people's shows, self-help shows, Oprah, whatever. But it is so true that I've learned that you have got to have, both people have got to be willing to compromise and work on it, not just one. One person can keep the relationship going, but it doesn't mean they're going to be happy doing it. They both have to be giving and taking. They both have to be compromising on everything and every aspect of the relationship, and not just one. One person, if there's a power imbalance, whether it's sexually, intellectually, emotionally, financially, whatever, that's not good. And even in relationships where people say that that's what they want, ultimately they're probably going to grow and change. I mean, for example, there was I don't know why this popped in my head, but there was an example of Alexis Bellino on The Real Housewives of the OC from a few seasons ago. Her husband, Jim, she's like this real Christian woman, and the real Christian, and they believe in the position of the man being the head of the household, telling the woman what to do. She has to obey and, whatever, that kind of bullshit. And so she was all about being a housewife and supporting her man, his career, and so forth. And that's who she was when she started the show. And over the course of 2 or 3 seasons, everything changed because she grew. She had her own income. She had her own sense of power, her own notoriety. And his business went down the tank, and hers turned around, and she established herself on her own way, and she began to make all the money, and he began to be at home. And the relationship suffered as a result of that, because they had set out this particular role for each of them to play. And fortunately, I guess they're still together, and they were able to accommodate that and to compromise and to grow with who they were. But if that happens in most relationships, that's just one example of what could happen in terms of growing apart. You either have to grow apart or grow together. And that's the only way a relationship stays together. So both of you have to decide to grow apart. I mean, both of you decide that one of you is going one way in your life, the other one's going another, and you want to split up and not work on it. Or you can try to work on it and compromise and keep things together. And in my opinion, it's always best to stay with the person you're with if you love them and they treat you well and all those sorts of things, because people always think the grass is greener on the other side, and it may seem that way for a while, but ultimately you recognize what you had and how important what you had was compared to someone's grass being greener, if you know what I mean. Speaking of sex, dick size does matter, by the way. Now, I know that every guy feels that way, whether you're a top, you're a bottom, you're versatile, whatever, if you're gay. But it does matter to me, and it is important. I think that people who say it doesn't, they're wrong. So I just want to say that real quick as well. Another thing I was going to say is have as much sex as you can when you're young. I think that people who save themselves for marriage or for some religious reason is a waste of time, and that they'll eventually regret that as they age. I did not waste any time when I was a teenager. I started having sex when I was 14 or 15, I think 15. And, before that, I fooled around with a couple of friends or whatever when I was younger than that. So, I was never afraid of sex. I never thought of sex as being taboo or wrong. I never thought of gay sex being a taboo or wrong because it was natural to me. And it never occurred to me that it was wrong until I was told it was wrong or, by society in general. But I think that I was sexually active as a teenager, and I think that's when you're supposed to be sexually active and experimental and things like that in your teens and your 20s, and because you begin to know your own body, what you like, what you don't like, what the other person likes, or people you're with, what turns them on, what you're good at, what you can do well, and how to improve upon it. I mean, you start to learn these things that you can't learn without actually doing them, and more importantly, about who you are as a sexual being. And if you go through all that when you're in your 20s and your 30s, you've gone through your quote unquote slut phase, which could be one person a year or what could be one person a night, depending on how slutty you are. My point is that you've gone through a phase where you've done experimenting with your own sexuality, and you know who you are sexually, you know what you want by the time you're ready to settle down and have a marriage, or if that's what you ever want anyway, is to have a marriage or a long-term relationship or whatever. You know what you're looking for in a partner sexually, what you're not looking for in the partner, what works for you, what doesn't. And so if you don't go through all that and you wait and you hold out from the time you're born until you're maybe 30 or whatever, and you get married, you've never had sex, you don't know anything about what you like and what you don't like. I mean, you may be attracted to certain types or whatever, but in terms of in practice, you don't know. And I just think it's a big mistake to save yourself for marriage or for religious reasons sexually. Sex is not that big a deal. I mean, people think they always make it this huge deal, like it's such a huge ordeal, but it's not. It's just mechanics. I mean, physical mechanics, and that's it. It's people who've been doing it for thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. So it's really not a big deal. So have as much sex as you can. Now on to some other things. As you age, also, you begin to realize that your parents become the child and the child becomes the parent. And what I mean by that is that, as you're a kid, your parents are there taking care of you. You're growing up, and they're there to take care of you, look after you, pay for your bills, and look after your health and well-being. And as you age, you begin to realize, maybe in your 30s, 40s, depending on how old your parents are beginning to age. They're getting older, and that they're mortal, that they're going to die someday. And you begin to have to take care of them to some degree or another. If you have a close relationship with them, of course. If you don't, that's different. But if you have a regular relationship with your parents, that's typically what you recognize. And so you begin to have to take over their looking out for their well-being the way they looked out for your own. And it is a sad thing that when you realize that you're beginning to have to do that, not because you resent doing it or you don't want to do it, but because it's sort of an end to the people that were always there. How do I put this without saying it the wrong way? They're always going to be there for you emotionally and, whatever, if you had to get a relationship with them, but they're not going to be there in the way that they could be when they were younger, because they're not as strong as they were physically. They're not as capable, maybe mentally they're not as sharp or whatever. Memory may be going. And so eventually you're probably going to have to take care of them the way they took care of you as a child. And it's just a natural progression in the human experience for that to happen if you have a relationship with your parents. So just remember, as you're young, to take care, to love your parents, and if you have a good relationship with them, and to appreciate the time you have with them when they're there and sharp and everything else, and hope that when you're older that you'll still have the same kind of relationship, but you recognize that you're probably going to have to take care of them as well to some degree. I talked about don't change yourself to please someone else earlier, I think, but I just mentioned it briefly, but I'll say about that is, don't. Yeah, I said that already, so let's move on. Friendships. Oh yeah. Friendships rarely last a lifetime. Okay. No matter how strong they seem to be at the time, they rarely last a lifetime. So even if you have someone you've been friends with for 20 years, sorry, I had to get a drink. Even if you've been friends with someone for 20 years, and you think that you're like brother and sister, or brother and brother, or sister and sister, or whatever. You're just so close and like family. Don't think that that means that you will always be friends or you will always be that close, because as I've said, there's a thread through all of this tonight. You know, people grow and people change, and people grow apart or they grow together. And friendships are the same way as relationships, where, you know, romantic relationships, you either grow together or you grow apart. And so no matter how strong they may seem, very few friendships last a lifetime. If you're fortunate enough to have one that has lasted a lifetime, kudos to you and that friend, because that's a very rare thing. And even in friendships that last a lifetime, they have ups and downs, just like every relationship, where you may not talk for a while and you may talk again, whatever, because of whatever has happened between you. But ultimately you come back together, and that's important. And I have a friendship like that, I think. And, you know, we're not friends the way we were when we were young, because we grew up and we grew to be different people than the other person, you know. To her, in her eyes, I am kind of city slicker, kind of, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for. She thinks I'm sort of stuck up or whatever, but she's a very country girl, whatever. And I like that, but she thinks I don't know. We're just very different. You know, she's very country girl. I'm very city guy, and I'm very kind of educated. She was in the Navy, and we're just very different in those ways. And so if you can kind of picture that and how those differences might be, that's how we've been. But we're still friends, but we're not like we were when we were young. And I've had other friendships that I thought would last for years or my entire life that I no longer talk to those people. And for sometimes it's for reasons that were stupid, and other times it's for reasons that were very valid on my part of their own. But I find it to be always sad and depressing and like a death when you lose a friend. But don't ever look at friendships as, you know, oh, this is going to end someday, so much as appreciate them while you have them and while you're there, and enjoy them and be the best friend you can. And don't take them for granted, because friendships really do rarely last forever. I talked about people changing as we age, you know, growing, whatever. Everything ending, nothing's permanent. I talked about that. Money. Yes, let's talk about money. Money is nice, but it is not, you know, a solution to every problem. When I was a kid, it was important, you know, as like a little kid, important to me that I grew up to have money. And I wanted to be, you know, a multimillionaire, and I don't know, I had all these things I wanted to be. I wanted to be an attorney, and I wanted to be I just all these things I wanted to be or whatever. And I didn't, as I grew, my aspirations changed because my personality changed, things I wanted changed. And so even though I grew up to have far more than my family had, my mom and my father and, you know, ever had, I'm, you know, I'd say I'm doing very well compared to what they had, financially. I'm certainly not a millionaire. I'm certainly not a billionaire or anything like that. And I never will be. And I'm okay with that, but I'm not, and so I'm doing fine, you know, for the most part financially. But my point is that money, you know, the times I've had money, I've had years where I've made, you know, I don't want to say the numbers, but I've made lots of money. Like I've been in very, very lots of money in some years. In other years, I haven't made so much money because I'm self-employed. And I know the years when I've had money that it makes you feel great because you're not stressed about money at all. Rather, for those years you have all that money, and the years when the economy was depressed and down because of my businesses, which are directly related to the economy, were very slow. It was very difficult, but I never changed how I felt about my relationship or how I felt about my family and my friends and the things I have. I was still appreciative of all the things I had and treated everyone the same. My point is that whether I had lots of money or had little money in those years of the depression or the recession, whatever we had, I was always pretty much equally the same happy-wise. I mean, I wasn't as happy without money as I was with it, of course, but my point is that it really didn't make much of a difference in terms of why you're happy. And there's actually an entire book called Happy, or Happiness rather, that talks about how everyone kind of has a set point for being happy, and money is not the solution. And money's not the solution to every problem, because the truth is that money solves some problems. It solves your financial problems, and that's really it. It can solve health problems if you have lots of it. It can not buy you true love. It can buy you fake love, if you know what I mean.